It's Cardboard Time, episode number 108, and I'm your host, Arwen Kathke. On today's episode, I have reviews of Surplus of Sloths, Misfit Heroes, and a chat with Emily Vincent. So I just wanted to preface this by saying that Thursday night, if you're listening to this when it drops, Thursday night, I will be having my top 20 of all time with Olivia Lothry on the Tabletop Express YouTube channel. I wasn't sure whether or not I wanted to do another top 20 so quick after the last one, but turns out a lot has changed over the past year, so I think that it's kind of time for a refresh and an update, and I'm looking forward to recording that as always with Olivia. It will be live, so you can interact, you can chat, you can say what your thoughts are, good or bad, on my opinions on board games. That is, again, Thursday night on the Tabletop Express YouTube channel. Well, let's go right into that Shelf of Aspiration, and it is at 116. That is down by 3 since the last time that we talked. And I was hoping to record this on Monday, but unfortunately I had to do it because tomorrow being Sunday and then Monday are both very busy days for me. But tomorrow I am going to get quite a bit played, so you'll get to hear all about that next time. Hopefully down below that 115 mark. That would be super nice. Couple things coming in. The first being some review copies, the first of which is Book It Battle Royale. That is a little card game that is very akin to Free Cell. So if you've played Free Cell on the computer, you kind of know. And some of the cards out there on the board actually have powers, so you're trying to get around those. It was a very interesting game. I don't know if I'm going to do a full review of it, but I will be posting about it on my social media channels. Surplus of Sloths. I have played this one a lot already, so that's why it didn't count for the Shelf of Aspiration, because I have played quite a bit of it. I did get to play even more, which I will obviously talk about today on the episode. And then crowdfunding. I did get Emerald Skulls in. That was something that I had backed when the Kickstarter came out. I decided to back that one. 6 games that were played, the first of which being Surplus of Sloths. The second of all one was Book It Battle Royale. And then the Fellowship of the Ring trick-taking game. I will be talking about this when I have more in-depth kind of gameplay. I get further along into it, but I'm very much enjoying it so far. It is a very interesting trick-taking game. I think it's worth the hype so far, is all I'll say about it for right now. Vincen is another game that I don't think I've seen a lot of hype for online, and I think it's deserved. I really like abstract puzzle games, and I think this one does a lot really, really well. So once I have a little bit more experience under my belt with that, I would like to talk about that as well. Aquasphere came to the table, and I will say that I was definitely a bit disappointed in that. I don't think that I'm going to do a full review. That is a Stefan Feld game. I was excited to get to the table. I finally did. And I have to say I wasn't a huge fan of it. It just felt a little bit flat in comparison to a lot of the other Stefan Feld games that I have, and I don't think that I feel a need to keep that around. So that one will be leaving the shelves. And then finally, I did get to play Emerald Skulls. I had a lot of fun with it, but I don't think that I'll be talking about it on the podcast. So yeah, that is wrapping that up. Down by 3. Pretty proud of myself, and hopefully getting down to that, 110 mark, maybe by the end of the month. We'll see. So let's talk about reviews. The first one being Surplus of Sloths. This plays from 2 to 5 players in 15 to 20 minutes, designed by Charlie McCarran. The art is by John Merchant, and this is published by Weird Giraffe Games. The rivers are flooding, and players are wildlife rescuers, each trying to save sloths and make them happy so that they can be awarded even more sloths. Happy sloths are sloths that are in a group of the same type with increasing size. For each type of sloth, the player with the most sloths in a row will be awarded more sloths to take care of at the end of the game, and those are basically your points. The starting rescuer will choose between 2 rows of sloths in the river to save. They'll choose one, and every other player will save another sloth in that row. The remaining sloth won't be saved, but don't worry, it'll end up in the surplus net to be saved at the end of the game. So really with this, you're drafting between the sloths in the row that you choose, and then the one that's left over goes to another area, which is where your points are going to be located. Whoever, gets the biggest run of sloths is going to pick up those points. So some sloths are really easy to join in with sloth groups, and these are marked with an X, so they serve as your wild. They fill in those spots in a row if you're missing a sloth, and they can multiply the value of the sloths in the surplus net if they do wind up in that surplus area. The sloths saved determine who gets the surplus sloths, but the surplus sloths determine the winner of the game. So make sure to save the right sloths to win the surplus, but not too many of them, as then there won't be that many in the surplus to be won. So this is a review copy. It is not the final components. Thank you to Weird Giraffe Games for providing this. I did play test this game several times at OrcaCon. I really enjoyed it. There's a good amount of changes even from that version. Carla and I sat in the back and played quite a few times. I gave my feedback. Yeah, and it was a really fun game. There's a really good tension in this game, and I think that it's mainly created from the fact that you're drafting from this row and trying to figure out not only what you want to bring into your hand, but what you want to go to that surplus area to go and get scored. It's something that I haven't seen much of. There might be another game that you kind of have to choose between getting something to potentially score points and then, letting things go into a point area. I don't think that I've seen much that have, basically done that. This is especially thinky at 2 players. I like it at all the player counts, but really at 2 players, it is very, very tense. You're trying to figure out what your opponent is going to do. You have 3 cards in the row. You're taking one, your opponent's taking the other, and then you're sending the third one to the scoring area. So it's really clever in how you kind of balance that. And I really, really like that, especially for a small box game. It provides a lot of good, thinky, clever play, which I really liked. I also really like the smaller card format that's used here. The cards are kind of akin, maybe a little bit stubbier to the cards that they use in Space Base. It does make it a lot lighter on the table space that's required, which I really liked. Makes the game more compact and easier to manage. I would say at 2, the game maybe lasts 10 minutes. It does go very, very quick. Your heavier player counts, it might go a little bit longer as people think and make decisions, but at 2, the game is super snappy. I would contend that it's more towards that 10 minutes, if not less, time frame. This, I think, is good for the younger set as well. The rules are extremely straightforward. It kind of teaches them about drafting, and kind of that balance between, making decisions and where do you want these things to go. I think that it's good for the younger audience as well. From a color vision perspective, very good symbology, no issues. It's a hallmark of Weird Giraffe. I know that when I get a game that Carla has been a part of and the team over at Weird Giraffe, it's going to basically be something that I can play. And I will say that this, continues that trend going forward. So for my final thoughts, this is a really fun small box game, especially for the price point. It's $9 on Pocketopia. Pocketopia is a group of crowdfunding campaigns that are running right now on BackerKit. It's not on Kickstarter, it's actually BackerKit. And they're small games that can be backed, and you get bonuses if you back, multiple ones, depending on which ones are partnered with each other. But if you like those small box games, I would encourage you to go check that out. It's a really neat, interesting campaign. If you like a lot of those small box games like I do, it's basically tailor-made to us. I've backed a couple already. So this one's sticking around on my shelves. I think that it is a nice little game, nice decision space, like I said. And yeah, go check it out on BackerKit. That is Surplus of Sloths. And then let's talk about Misfit Heroes. This plays from 2 to 4 players in 30 to 45 minutes. It is designed by Phil Walker Harding. The graphic design is by Estefania Rodriguez, and this is published by AEG. After a bizarre interdimensional event of massive proportions, Earth as we know it has been forever altered when a fantastic realm merged with ours. The result is a land called Absurdia, where magic beasts live amongst ordinary people and vice versa. There's no going back to the way that things were in the place of improbable combinations from monster accountants to cosmic wedding planners. In Misfit Heroes, players are organizing crews in hopes of gaining influence to win over the hearts and minds of the citizens in nearby regions. The character cards players will use are different every single time you play. Before a game, the cards you will use are created by placing each character transparency together with an attribute card in a card sleeve. You'll never know which characters are in the deck, and the combinations are almost endless. During play, each character card gives a player special actions such as earning money, drawing more cards, and most importantly, gaining influence in the mountain, forest, sea, and city regions of the kingdom. When a player has collected 6 influence, they may claim a region of the corresponding type, which scores them points. The player who best uses their characters in a combination and gains the most points wins. So thanks to AEG for this review copy. I did first see this at Gen Con last year. I actually had a misconception about it. I thought that this was going to be a lot like your other card crafting games, in that during the game you are going to be crafting the cards. This is everything. Like, as soon as you get the box, you're sleeving these cards, you're putting them together, and then if you want, and this is really up to the players, you can take 4 of them, which they recommend. You take 4 of them, you swap them around between the transparencies and the attribute cards, and you swap them and create new cards so that no 2 games are ever going to really be the same. I guess if you could play a lot, you might cycle back, but I think you would have to play a ton. There are a lot of cards involved with this, so there's a lot of variety that you can come up with this game. So I had the impression that it was going to be, that kind of, during the game. This is much different than that. And I kind of like it. I think that might be a little bit too much. I will say that I love the art on this. It's wild, and it kind of captures the kind of absurdness of this. There's like the mundane, and then there's the fantastical as well, which I thought was pretty cool. So you wind up with a lot of fantasy creatures in mundane situations. You wind up with a lot of mundane people in these wild fantasy situations. So it's a lot of fun to see the combos created in the artwork. It's one of my favorite things about this, just to see the wacky combinations that you get by trying these different cards out. This is a fun tableau builder. Really what you're trying to do at its core is build an engine that's going to get you as many points as possible, and then you're going to try to gain influence, which are these symbols. If you gain enough of them, you can turn them into by-region tiles for points. And that's really the essence of it. It's not a super complex game, but what you're trying to do is just create the best engine to score the most points. And you're building up your tableau. Some things will trigger others. You'll have these end of game victory conditions that you'll also be putting out. You'll put out different cards that might trigger another card that can go and lead to another card being triggered. So it's about putting out the right things in the right sequence so that you can get the most possible benefit out of what you're putting onto the board. It does go very fast. You're building a 4x4 grid, and then the game is over. So it does go by, I would say that 30 minutes, 45 if you're playing the 4-player version of this. But if you're playing 2 players, it's super snappy. You're going to be going super quick through this. The fact that everything is so random can lead to some wild combinations, and this is where some players might drop off a little bit. Some players have a great potential at the start, and others might need to draw because they don't like their hands, they don't have anything that works. I've had a couple of players who do like a lot of that balance say that they really didn't like the fact that they had the potential for a bad draw out of the gate. One of the people that I played with actually did have that bad draw. I didn't find it that bad. I don't know if it was just because I didn't experience a draw that was that bad, or I just found the way around it. I do think that you have the ability on one of your turns, you basically have the ability to discard as many cards as you want, and you get that many cards and then 2 more on top of that. So it does give you the opportunity to kind of cycle through pretty quickly and build your hand up to something and, basically give you the tableau that you're looking for. It does take a turn, but I feel like this does that fairly decently, so I didn't find it that bad. The thing that I do like most in this game is the fact that every single game that I've played has felt wildly different. And that's not just from an art standpoint and seeing these wacky combinations. The gameplay itself has actually felt very different. You do have to adapt your strategy to the cards that are in play. You can't go and just continuously cycle that hand and expect to be successful. At some point, you do have to play down cards, and then once you have that base, you have to try to adapt to that and see what you can pull that will give you that best strategy possible. And again, sometimes the best move is to reset your hand. The game very easily allows that, but you're continuously building to a tableau that you're going to fill out, that you're going to try to get as many of those points as possible. From a color vision perspective, I thought that they did a good job. Everything is done either through symbols. There are a couple of colors, I believe it's a blue and a red, that are banners on the side, and they are actually different shapes. So you can actually see the different shapes coming together on one side or another. And when a card does refer to a color, it is referring to that color and that shape as well. So I thought that that was really well done. I did not have a problem playing this at all, which was very, very good. So for my final thoughts, if you're a fan of complete balance, I don't think that this is going to be the game for you. If you really need a situation where you know what's coming out, you have a fair, completely balanced hand in comparison to the other players, you may not get this from this game. And that's something that I feel like those players might not click with this. However, I think if you like tactical games that force you to kind of adapt to what you have, if you feel like, you want a different game every single time that you play and have something new that you're going to see, this is going to be right up your alley for that. I do tend to be towards the latter. I like to adapt to things. I like to, kind of see, okay, I have this combination. What can I do in this situation? How can I get out of this, or how can I get the most out of what I have to play here? the fact that I will never quite play the same game of this twice is incredibly intriguing to me. And that's why this is staying on my shelves. I've had fun every single time that I've played it. I am playing quite a bit of it, and I'm introducing new people to it who, for the most part, have liked it, except for those players who have sought balance. And that's one thing that I would recommend, kind of thinking about your gameplay style and act accordingly. But yeah, this game is actually up on Kickstarter as of this recording. You can go check that out if this is something that you're interested in. And that is Misfit Heroes. And stay tuned, because coming up next, we have an interview with Emily Vincent. On today's interview segment, I have Emily Vincent. Emily is the founder of Pink Hawk Games, which will be publishing the upcoming Pirates of the High Teas, as well as the designer of Knitting Circle, which is coming soon from Flat Out Games. Emily, welcome to Cardboard Time.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
I am so excited to have you on. We met, I believe it was last year or the year before at Origins.
I think it was last year so it's been 2 years of Origins. 2 Originses,
yes.
I think. Yeah.
Yes. It's crazy that it's been that long, because I feel like it's been longer, but it really hasn't. And in that time, I've gotten to know you, hang out, got to play Pirates of the High Teas, which I'm super excited about. But I'd like you to kind of tell everybody a little bit about how you got into the hobby and what your history is with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm one of those lifelong gamers, right? So when I was a kid, I played board games with my mom, and, she kicked my butt at Clue all the time. And then I was in like an after school program, so I played a lot of Monopoly with 8-year-olds, as one does, and with who knows what rules. And shockingly, I played bridge on the school bus to high school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I have a strange game history. And then, in the early 2000s, got into the modern hobby with Settlers of Catan, and have sort of been absorbing more and more modern board games ever since. So, longtime game player, and also longtime designer. So, professionally, in my other professional life, I started in software, but I quickly went back to school for design. And so I did like user interface and user experience design. So I've spent, a couple decades designing usable computer systems, but it's only in the last 3 years that I moved into designing board games. So I sort of took my love of games and my love of design and brought them together here.
So it's interesting that you mentioned user experience, and I think that could be, a big advantage for you in designing like the layout of a player board or cards or something like that. Is that translated over for you?
Yeah, that's 100% translated. And I think what has translated even more is all of the years I've spent listening to people tell me that my designs are bad. Because that's essentially playtesting, right? Mm-hmm. That is, you're user testing. And so I'm very used to not only how do you put something in front of someone to get useful feedback and insight, but also how do you manage the feelings that come with finding out all of the ways that your baby is ugly and sort of plowing through. And I know that's a hard thing to develop and to be okay with. And I think for a lot of first-time game designers who are not coming from design and maybe other places where you get critique and review like software and stuff like that moment of getting playtest feedback can be really, it just sort of takes your breath away sometimes.
It's kind of crazy that first time that you step outside the bubble of just friends and family and have to do everything publicly. And then somebody's like, well, I didn't like this. I didn't like that. And it's like, oh my God, this thing that I designed is terrible. It's no.
Yeah.
Just take a step back. Yep. It's fine.
It's fine. And finding ways to hear what they're really saying through their own emotions of, I won that game, or I lost that game, or I did a thing that made me feel really dumb and now I'm embarrassed and I'm mad about it, right? And so, how to hear what they actually are saying and see what actually happened and sort of get some truth from that. I don't know. I enjoy that process. I think it's a fascinating little puzzle because humans are so complicated and soft and squishy and, weird, and, we just make stuff up sometimes. So I really enjoy that part of the design process.
Yeah, it's kind of a wild process to see people go through, especially for the first time, and see that development. It's really, really cool. So, one of the things I noticed about Pirates of the High Teas is it's really the first pirate game that I can recall that nobody actually steals from each other. What was your motivation behind that?
Yeah, no, this has been a huge thing that comes up in playtests all the time of people saying, but I'm a pirate. I just want to steal that cake that you just got, right? And I just think, for me personally, I don't enjoy games with take that. I find them to be real big feel bad moments. And I think the harder you work at getting something, the worse it feels to lose, right? So if it was draw 2 cards off the top of the deck and, someone might take one of them, well, they were 2 random cards that I really didn't do anything to get, right? But in Pirates, there's, calculating which action space do I want to take? Do I want to give up this thing in order to be able to get the perfect thing that I want? And the couple times I tried with the ability to take that away from someone, it just felt so bad because you felt like you lost all of the trade-offs that you made in the last 2 turns were just wasted, right? You might as well have gotten 3 random cards because the one thing you really wanted just got yoinked. So it really just comes from my personal preference of what types of games I like to play. But I'm also a huge fan of cozy games, and I think there should be more cozy games in the world. And I think there's no reason that we can't have cozy pirates, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why not? Yeah.
I really, really love the theme. I think that it definitely comes through as that kind of cozy, fun pirate, like tea time kind of game, which really, really translated well into the mechanics in that. So I didn't personally miss stealing anything, but I'm also not a person who enjoys a lot of take that. So this does resonate with me too.
Well, maybe it's going to be a pirate game that lands for people who haven't enjoyed playing lots of pirate games because there is so much stealing in pirate games, right? So maybe we're expanding the audience of who gets to play pirate games now.
Exactly. And that's a good thing. We always want to include people.
Exactly.
So you stumbled into the pirate theme for this game through a number of playtests. Could you tell the audience maybe a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually the second game I ever started designing, and I feel like it's the second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth because it's gone through so many different, just wildly different iterations, right? It started with, you had flour and milk and you had to make cakes, right? And at some point there were dice where you were in the kitchen and you were trying to bake these things, or in the, in the galley, and you had to allocate dice and roll them. But there were some sabotage cards where you could play it on another pirate and then or another player, and they would have roll with disadvantage, right? Or take a die away from them and stuff like that. And so I was playing with that. The game was actually called Tea Time. There were no pirates in the game at this point. And I was in a playtest and I was like, all right, I think the name Tea Time is a terrible name. And maybe if I had a better name, I'd have more idea of what I want to do with this game. And one of the playtesters was like, well, I mean, you're doing all this weird sabotage stuff, which why, if we're bakers, are we sabotaging each other in the kitchen? What if it was Pirates of the High Teas and you were pirates? And I was like, oh, that pun is brilliant. And we are now pirates. And so I sort of spent like the next year figuring out how to bring pirates into it more than just a pun on the front of the box, right? So what do pirates have? They have treasure, they have parrots, they use cannons, right? So then we tried stealing from each other. There were ships doing battle at one point in this game once we became pirates, but it's been all over the place.
That has been an evolution, because I definitely did not see ships doing battle with each other.
No. You had to I think you had to conquer like the, HMS Cupcake in order to get the cupcake, and you had to conquer the HMS, Earl Grey to get the Earl Grey thing and stuff like that. It was too much.
Yeah. Sometimes addition through subtraction is a very good thing.
Yes, absolutely.
So you got into the publishing business and you formed your own company, Pink Hawk Games. What made you want to do that?
So it's kind of a couple reasons, right? So one is, I've always kind of wanted to see what it would like to start my own company. And I've been in tech for years, and I always had this thing of like, but I don't have an idea for a product, right? What I do is UI, UX. I make other products better, but I don't necessarily design an algorithm that, does a thing or make a piece of hardware, but I can make your algorithm more usable and I can make your hardware more usable. And when I started designing games, I sort of suddenly, through some conversations with my partner, realized, oh, wait, I've just designed a product. Like I could make a company around this, and I could sell a product because I can design a product. So that was part of it, just like the opportunity. I also think I personally enjoyed the product design aspects of it. So making the decisions on the exact components, the color palettes, the idea of sort of sending it out into the ether, and maybe Pirates of the High Teas comes back as Bigfoot in the High Sierras or something like that. I was like, I don't know, right? I believe in the game that I've designed, and I think I would enjoy doing all the parts that come with publishing it and getting it through manufacturing. And I think I could do them, right? I think I had that skill set to sort of run the business. And so I sort of said, why not, right? I should give it a shot. And I looked through the games that I'd been designing, and I decided Pirates was going to be the first one to go, because I think it really represents my design aesthetic and what I'm trying to do with games. And so I said, I might as well give it a shot. I also will say, right, so some of that is like I want to maintain control, and some of it is just looking at the pure business side of this industry. And it's really hard to make a living at any part of this industry, but it's particularly hard as a freelancer, right? As a freelance game designer, because you are constantly doing work that you don't know if you will ever get paid back for. And you have to predict where different companies are going and do the matching. And I'm still doing all of that as an independent game designer, but I'm also making choices about which ones, I believe in and I want to publish, and I want to see what I can do, running a company and having that side of the business as well.
So one of the things that you had mentioned was that you enjoy kind of the development and user experience side of things. So we just had Joseph Chen on. We were talking about more the development side, which is something that we haven't talked a lot about on here. Is that something that you could see yourself getting into, picking up some other games and developing them in-house?
Yes, 100%. And actually, Joseph was one of the developers on Knitting Circle. So
Perfect.
Part of that team. So yes, I am two sides here. So I am starting to do some independent development work with other publishers. So just doing game development for folks. And I fully intend to be signing other people's games to Pink Hawk once I've done, what I sort of consider the proof of concept, which is 1 or 2 games of my own, to show that, like, if a designer signs their game with me, like, I'm trustworthy. I will do well with it. I will get it through the finish line. They're not going to, like, send it into a black hole and then, get it back in 5 years because I didn't do anything with it. And so I would love to be signing and developing other people's games, because I think there's so many interesting people and games out there, right? I mean, my ideas are not the most amazing. I mean, I love my ideas, right? But there's so many other things and so many other ideas that I want to see on the shelves. And I think if I can run a publishing business, I can be a part of getting those games to the shelves. I particularly see so many great games in online game design communities. And there are people in those communities who don't have the ability to get to major conventions, whether it's because of money or time. They have, family care obligations. They have jobs. They have all sorts of things. And they're not necessarily getting access to pitching opportunities and stuff like that because they're not at some of these big conventions. So I'd love to be able to focus in and get, some designers who are right now struggling to sort of break through.
Yeah, that brings up a very interesting point, and I might actually move one of our questions forward that I had for later. One of the posts I remember seeing was from Marceline Lehman, who was talking about the pitching process and how, it's difficult for some people who can't get to conventions and don't have connections and things like that. And I do see a theme kind of coming up here, especially with your company, around inclusion. And I was kind of curious what inclusion meant to you.
Yeah, inclusion is something that goes really deep for me as a woman who has spent decades in the tech sector, including I went to a tech high school, and my senior year I got into college. I went to a tech college as well, and I had someone tell me that I took their spot because I was a woman and they were a man. And I think every woman in tech has those stories, right? And it's sort of been all around me, being not in the majority. But I've also felt like I have some skills to be able to do things like advance up the career track. So in my tech career, I went into management positions. I was a director at my company. I had a team of 250 people, right? And so for me, my job was always about knocking open doors and getting seats at the table and making sure that those doors stayed open so that I could pull in people behind me. Because I can't fight for a seat at the table and then be like, well, there's one seat and I've got it, right? So I just sort of feel like that's always been, I saw that I had an advantage, that I might be able to be sort of that icebreaker and plow a path for other people. And so I did that in my job, and I think that's one of the things that I can do here in this industry as well. But for me, inclusion is about hearing other ideas and other voices that make whatever we're doing better. So when I was a manager that was hiring other managers, I always looked for the moment after I hired someone when they came up to me and said, Emily, I disagree with what you're planning to do, and here's why, right? Because that's when I knew I'd hired the right person who was able to sort of, I'll say speak truth to power for as much power as I had, right? Mm-hmm. But, I wanted people who disagreed with me because I know I cannot have the best ideas. Like, there's no way I've got all of the best ideas, right? And so I just want to be surrounded by people who are going to, in a collaborative and cooperative way, disagree, right? And challenge us all to get to something better. And so I think that translates into the board game industry, because I think there are so many games out there that are not made that I think people would be excited to play, and no one even knows to ask for them yet because we're just so used to what's always been there. We're so used to the status quo. And so for me, inclusion is about getting that like melting pot of cool ideas and being able to make us all better.
It was really kind of fascinating. I was watching Our Family Plays Games, the recap of their Sunday episode. We're recording this on a Monday. And one of the things that they were talking about is games we haven't played in like 5 years. And some of them you go back to and you're just like, yeah, this still hits. This is great. And then others you're just like, this is the same thing over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one thing that I look back at, and you're right. You kind of have this journey where you see that you have all of these new and unique things that you never knew existed, and now they're right in front of you. And I think that's the beautiful thing about diversity and inclusion is trying to get those different ideas in and get them in play and get them developed so that they're at least in front of people. Whether people choose to play them or not is up to them, but they're at least available.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you can just look at, some of the surprise successes that have happened, right? No one knew to ask for a cozy game about books until A Place for All My Books just did, $1 million on Kickstarter.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's there. People don't know they want it until they see it. And so it's just about the risk taking, but you can mitigate that risk by getting a bunch of voices in who can put out a bunch of cool ideas. So
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a fantastic, and I will probably be pulling quotes
totally.
from this conversation for the podcast. You've made it very, very easy for me. One thing that I also wanted to talk to you about, we were talking before the show on tariffs and the effect of tariffs. You have a Kickstarter that's coming up. It's something that has recently come up that now you have to factor in. It's something that we talked about briefly on the Gamma Recap episode, but I wanted to get your perspective on what you're going through with tariffs right now. Not necessarily any specifics that, you can't give out, but just in general, like, what are you dealing with? How is it affecting you?
Yeah, so my Kickstarter launches in about a week from when we recorded this, not necessarily from when it posts. And I had been pretty set on my price point until a couple days ago. And the problem with tariffs, right, is that they eat into my profit because I, as the business owner, pay the tariffs to the U.S. government. In case anyone was unclear, China does not pay tariffs. I, the business, pay them. And so, you always build margin into the price of a game. And obviously, I'm a first-time publisher, so I've done as much homework as I can about how to build in enough margin because shipping costs go up and down, right? Things change. So you want to make sure you've got enough in there for the unexpected. And so when we were looking at 10% tariffs, most of the publishers I was talking to were like, yeah, if we haven't built in to account for 10%, we've done something horribly wrong, right? Mm-hmm. But now that we're talking 20, 25, 30, I've heard 60, 60%, right? I mean, it's those numbers, there's not enough room in the profit margin to absorb that without potentially sort of flipping over into the red. So, there's a lot of, and what I'll say the other part of this is we just don't know, right? It's so rapidly changing. The deal with tariffs is that they are applied the day your stuff goes off the boat onto the port in the US. So I already know some folks who had much smaller shipments that arrived during like a 36-hour period where we'd gotten rid of what's called the de minimis exemption. Anyway, they paid a couple extra $100 on an order that was only a couple $100 because they had to suddenly pay tariffs. And it was just in that tiny window. And I got something from China a week later and I didn't have to pay tariffs, right? And so the instability of it is just, you don't even know how to plan for it, right? If we could say there'll be 20% in April and 40% in September, right? Then you could make a plan. Mm-hmm. But right now we're just sort of at like, it could be nothing or it could be, 10x what we're doing. So trying to figure out how to appropriately price a game is really hard right now. So I think the other debate people are having is, you can increase the price of your game. That seems to be the clear answer, right? That game costs are going to go up. There's some risk being out on the front of that, right? So I've done a bunch of comparisons of games that I think are similar weight to my game. And if I come in at a price that's higher than that, people are going to be like, what's the deal? That's not the right price for this game. However, I suspect a whole bunch of companies pretty quickly after I do it would be setting the prices of those comparable games at the same place I am. So it's hard to figure out how to sort of like raise a price without seeming like you're price gouging people, that I'm like a new publisher that doesn't know what I'm doing, right? So I've priced my game so exorbitantly that you're like, they have no idea what's going on, right? Because you're trying to build trust and instill trust with folks.
Yeah.
But I mean, at the end of the day, it's almost certain that prices are going to go up unless we finally get to some stable answer on this. And the question will be how much. And then I think the other thing that I'm seeing folks do is talk about adding the tariffs, because again, you don't know the tariffs till the day it arrives in the US, is putting that into the shipping costs, like on a Kickstarter, which I think totally works for a Kickstarter, right? I mean, it passes the cost directly on. So if you put it in the MSRP, maybe you'll do something where like I take half the hit and the customer takes half the hit or something like that. Or if I put it in the shipping costs, I could do the same thing, right? Maybe the tariffs will be 20% and I'll put 10% into the shipping cost and I'll eat the other 10% or something like that. The trick with putting it into the shipping costs is that if I've got a whole bunch of product that then is planning to go to retail, now the tariff is no longer built into any of my costs. And so now I'm just eating it entirely, right? Because I can't charge more to the retailer. I can't like pass it on to the retailer too, so they eat 100% of the tariff, right? So it's this question of like, do we all eat a little piece of the tariff along the way, or do I take it all, or do I just raise the prices, right? It's a mess, and nobody has the answer because literally no one has had a boat come in full of games and gotten a new tariff. Nobody is going to know for months, right? So.
Well, and like you said, it's so evolving all of the time where, it raises, it goes into effect, and then it's not in effect, and then it is in effect, and it's higher, and then it's not in effect. And that's the thing, like playing roulette with when your boat is going to come in is not conducive to business.
Right.
And the other thing is we're not dealing in the board game industry, and I'd like to remind people of this. We're not dealing with major, huge companies that are doing this. The people that are doing this are smaller companies. They're not massive corporations. Even Asmodee, being the biggest by far, is still relatively small.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
And the margins here are really slim, right? It's not like most people are not becoming millionaires on board game publishing. In fact, I was talking to a publisher, a fairly large publisher, that was like, yeah, sometimes we don't actually pay ourselves because we pay our employees, but we as like the owners, the publishers, we don't get paid this pay period because like we got to make sure we're taking care of our employees first.
Yeah.
And so it's just, I think the biggest question is how do you build for the kind of instability and risk, which is just going to sort of push people to build in even a little bit more padding. So, and I think the other thing is, right, the point of tariffs is to move manufacturing back to the US, which would be lovely, right? I think no one would be mad if we didn't have to ship our games across an ocean.
Yeah.
But to build that kind of infrastructure is going to take time in years, right?
Yes.
And there's still a supply chain problem where most of the wood and the paper doesn't come from the US. It has to come from Canada or China or something like that, which is part of why manufacturing in China is so effective or efficient in terms of cost, because they produce paper and wood there at levels that they can quickly and easily move it around the country. Same thing if you want to like print books, printing them in Canada is great because they have tons of trees that they're cutting down to make paper out of, right? Whereas if you're doing it here in the US, we got to ship paper in. So.
Yep. Exactly. A lot to think about. Kind of pivoting, but still on the Gamma topic. And one thing that I did want to cover from Gamma, you were a Horizons Fellowship winner. What has that meant to you, and what has that enabled you to do in your career?
Yeah, the Horizon Fellowship was amazing. So I was last year, not this sort of current year. And it was, so I did it before I had launched my first Kickstarter. So there was a ton of just educational content of, being able to sit down and, pick someone's brain. They bring in speakers on a topic and you can just, let's talk about marketing for an hour and everyone just gets to, ask them anything. I had a mentor, a wonderful mentor, Carla, who answered a lot of my questions one-on-one and talked through, played my games and gave me some feedback, talked about how she got started and things like that. Then I have to say, I completely underestimated just how much it would mean at Gamma Expo itself, right? So being there and just being able to say, hi, I'm Emily, I'm one of the Horizons Fellows, people were like, I would love to hear about what you're working on. I'd love to come swing by and see it, right? And we just had people who were excited about the program, and so they wanted to meet the people in it. They brought everyone through. We had media come through last year, and so then I went back to Gamma Expo this year, and there are people who are like, hey, remember we met last year. I'm so excited to see the progress that Pirates has made, all sorts of things. And it was just the network that I built. I just hadn't really understood, because I think outside of Gamma, like if you just talk to like someone on the street and be like, I'm a Gamma Horizons fellow, they're like, what?
What is that?
Yeah, even someone in board games who loves games, right? They're not going to know what that was. But the connections that I made to retailers, to other publishers, to people in fulfillment, right? I mean, it just jump-started me in a way that I have no idea how I would have done. It would have taken me a lot of courage and probably a lot of years of just sort of like introducing myself and aggressively sort of like, this is who I am and these are my games and things like that. So it's just a huge opportunity and a huge platform. And I'm so glad that Gamma has this fellowship, that they've, doubled down on DEI, right? And that they're sort of really committed to this. So.
And I will say, as far as the program goes, that is one thing that, I have my gripes with Gamma. They seem to be getting better. I will say that I really enjoyed my time at Expo.
Yeah.
The Horizons Fellowship is one thing that I think they do so incredibly well, and I'm so glad that they do it, because they're making connections for people. They're getting different voices into the industry, and that is something for not the industry to survive, but also thrive and expand and get out to new audiences. It's so necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just being able to showcase these games from people who are not yet connected in the industry, some of them have, cool new stuff that these retailers are going to want to show in their store, right? When the retailers can walk up and be like, I know who I would sell this to, right? It's just such an amazing connection for folks who didn't have that connection before.
So speaking of networking, in your journal, you mentioned that networking normally isn't something that you enjoy doing, except in the board game industry. What do you think it is about the industry that kind of makes this shift happen? And I know for me personally, that is absolutely true. I love networking at conventions. I love meeting people at conventions. And outside of that, I don't do well at all. It's terrible.
Yeah, I think it has something to do with just how much joy we all have in games and gaming, and that you can generally find a common touch point with someone regardless of what types of games they play and are interested in. And you have this sort of built-in thing to talk about where, for whatever reason, like I really enjoyed writing software and I really enjoyed doing user interface and user experience, but particularly the software side, I never felt like I wanted to stand at a convention and like talk shop with people. And here I do, right? Because there's just so much that I find really fun to talk about. I also think there's just, not that there's not fun people in tech, but there's something different about being at a spot where we're all here to play games and connect in the way that you do over games, versus like going to a conference where my goal is to be professional and represent the business and, build specific connections, right? Synergize. Yeah. I just find it really easy to synergize with folks in the board game community in a way that I didn't in my past life. So
yeah, I love that kind of shared interest, and I do think that helps immensely. Oftentimes we have that shared interest. It's a good way to get to know people initially. And then you're talking about all sorts of other stuff after that, like how's your dog, how's your cat, that kind of stuff, which really I haven't seen anywhere else, kind of like you said.
I think it's also, I don't know, I want to say this in the most loving way possible. I think we're just like a lot of weirdos, right? Like we have like eccentric interests and like very, fandoms that we're like obsessive about. And not that those people don't exist in other industries, but I think in the game industry, you're allowed to wear that much closer to the surface, right? And so I might be talking to someone at a business meeting that, has a secret love for a specific fandom that I'm also a fan of, and we will never get there over polite sandwiches, right? But here I might just be wearing the shirt.
Yeah, exactly. So let's pivot to Knitting Circle for a minute. You have your own publishing company, but you decided to sign Knitting Circle with Flatout. Can you kind of walk us through that journey and why you chose Flatout over self-publishing?
Yeah, absolutely. So Knitting Circle is a game that I designed sort of initially on like a assignment to myself, where I was listening to a podcast about cozy games, and I was like, if I was going to design a cozy game, what would it be about? And I was like, knitting. I've knitted, and there's two stitches to knitting, and there's two sides of a tile. That must be a game, right? And so it was one of those games that just sort of came together in a very fast way, and so I thought of it at the beginning of December, and in March I was at Unpub with a prototype that had a lot of 3D printed pieces, so it was very pretty, and just it was playing really well, and it got a ton of attention, and it got buzz, right? And a couple high profile folks tweeted about it afterwards, and it got a bunch of attention from folks at the con, and I sort of had this moment of realization of two things. One is there was some momentum here, and if I could harness that, that could be a way to sort of jumpstart myself into the industry, right? If I could take that buzz and turn it into getting this game signed, that would be a huge win, because then I'd have a signed game, right? And ideally at some point a published game. The second piece, I'd been playing with the idea of self-publishing, but the game that Knitting Circle had a ton of components, right? Because all these little knitting tiles, and didn't quite represent the brand that I had imagined for Pink Hawk in the way that Pirates of the High Teas does, or that, some of my other games do, which is really this like whimsical strategy game. Knitting Circle is very cozy, right? It's puzzly and brain burny, but it's just cozy, and there's a little bit of whimsy there. There's some cats, right? And things like that. So for whatever reason, to me, it just felt like a great game to try and sign, so that then I could get the experience of doing that, of seeing someone take my game from start to finish and really just learn as much as I possibly could from someone else, right? So rather than just trying to do it by myself for the first game, cuddle up with someone and learn everything. So one of the folks that ended up hearing about Knitting Circle through that was Flatout. And I got connected with them, and they played the game, and they were excited about the game. They were excited to work with me, and I'll be honest, right? Flatout is kind of like a dream come true for me. So when they said they were interested, I was like, that settles any question about whether I should self-publish it. And what they were also chatting with me about that I wasn't sharing publicly was, could it be a Calico game, right? And I was like, could it? Like, that would be amazing. One of their questions was, would you be okay if we added cats? And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
I would love to add cats. Can I show you my cats? Can I show you my statues of cats? Can I show you my tattoos of cats? Like, yes, let's add cats. So, the stars aligned in a way that was just really exciting, and let me go with Flatout, who, I love their games. And I love like what they're doing with the brand, but also they have a super cool model that I don't know if folks know about, the collab model that they do.
Could you maybe explain that for the audience a little bit more?
Yes. So a lot of companies, when you sign a game, they take the game and they do development in-house, right? So they employ either employee developers or contractor developers, but you hand them your game and then they'll send some stuff back and they'll be like, hey, what do you think about this change? Or here's some art, do you have any concerns? But you're maybe not really involved in that process. And so what you get at the other side, they might completely change it, right? It could go from Knitting Circle to Crochet Circle to, Coffee Circle. I don't know, right? So what Flatout does, actually, they bring you on as part of the development team. And so I was there every week as we did play tests and we made design changes, and I came up with new ideas and I went and tested them and I came back and I said how it worked. And it's all part of an arrangement where that whole development team is also compensated based on, how the game sells and stuff like that. So it's not just like you're paid an hourly wage, but like you have an investment in how well the game does. And so it's a really cool collaborative, sharing sort of model. And I love it. And I was like, oh, and that means I get to see what we're doing, right? And how it all works. So So yeah, I have no regrets about doing that. The team is fabulous, and it's just such an opportunity to get to work with such great people and like
Oh yeah.
learn from some folks with great experience, right? And great insight. So
No, I mean, getting to meet them and spend time with them in Seattle was just so incredibly cool. And I knew that they were really good folks, but I didn't know how awesome that they were
yeah.
until I really spent that time and got to know them. And I'm very fortunate that I was able to experience that. And it's really interesting, the development model that they have, because it really, like you said, does bring the designer into the fold, and you still have that vision while getting the help that you need to, you know, cooperatively make something even bigger.
Yeah. Yeah. Can't speak highly enough of that team and everything that they're doing. So,
So, in your spare time, what
yes.
little spare time that you have, you are a amateur circus performer and dancer when you're not working on games. What is your history in the circus arts?
Yeah, so I'll say my history in dance goes back much farther. I'm one of those like former child dancers who
Okay.
did tap for 10 years or whatever it was. But I started doing circus. I'm gonna say it was about a little over 10 years ago at this point. And a thing that not everyone knows, but so I was diagnosed with cancer in 2013. And so did like a full year of like chemo and surgery and all sorts of stuff. And I've sort of always been an athlete and a mover, but felt like after that experience, I sort of needed to do something to like reclaim my body
Hmm.
and make it my own again. And so I sort of took my love of like, let's do something athletic and my love of dance and movement and music and stuff like that. And turns out there's a circus gym right down the street from my house. So I
Wow.
just started taking lessons. This is a thing you can do in Somerville, Massachusetts, and it turns out lots of other places in the country. So I mostly have done what's called aerial hoop or lyra. And I've actually sort of brought it closer to the floor at times and do what I call sort of dance hoop, which lets you combine dance with this aerial hoop, but also lets you add a lot of like swinging type motion rather than just like up in the air doing tricks. And I, have done some other parts. I'm working on my sear wheel, which is a ground apparatus. But I did a 2-year professional prep program as well. So learned a lot about, how do you book gigs and how do you sort of set up your own, who you are as an artist and things like that. Build a routine that sort of has structure and stuff like that you can pitch around and perform. So I've done amateur performances around the Boston area, but most recently I've been focusing on my contemporary dance company, which I just stood up with 4 very good friends in the last year. And our first show is going to be this this June. We moved it to June. So, yes, we've been doing contemporary dance for, dancers of all sorts of experience and background, but we're all sort of we're former dancers, right? We're all child dancers who left dance for various reasons of body and age and things like that, who've come back to it as adults and are building a show around the concept of rewild and what it means to rewild yourself as an adult. So
I
very
think
excited
that's
about that
so
show.
amazing. That
Oh,
is
thank
so,
you.
so cool. Is that something that we could ever see, maybe making its way into the board game world?
I mean, so I do have this idea of a game about building a performance piece because I think there's something about the way that you work up and build up to certain tricks, like difficult tricks, and then how you stitch them together with, sort of beauty and dance movement and stuff. And there's like a little bit of I don't know quite what it is, but like you build up a skill, right? And so you practice, 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 which to me feels like, adding cards to my deck or something of that trick. But then I
Hmm.
actually have to perform it. And so there's kind of this like I want to roll a die and see if I can actually pull it off in real time where, I've got some modifiers based on how much I've practiced it or whatever. But I don't know. There's an idea floating around in my head with that. It's not whimsical yet, but it's
It'll
certainly
get
there.
there. You'll get there. I have faith in you to do that.
Thanks.
So what's on your table other than what you're designing?
Yeah. So recently we finished up Sagrada Artisans, which I enjoy. I enjoy that game so much. It's
So
just
good.
exactly my type of game. And then I've been trying to get through a bunch of stuff that's in Shrink. And then also some stuff that I just haven't played. So it may be shocking for people to know I had never played Splendor until just recently. So now I have played Splendor, and we played that a bunch of times until I finally won, because Eric, my partner, kicked my butt so many times. And I basically made him play it until I finally won, and we haven't played it since. So I'm sure that'll get back to my table.
Mm-hmm.
And then what else? I think those have been the main things. I was at Granite Game Summit this past weekend, so I played Obsession while I was there, and I finally played Feast for Odin. So that is now another one that I feel like I should have checked off my list a long time ago, but I have now played it.
Both excellent games. I absolutely adore Obsession, and I think they're both top 20 games for me at this point.
Yeah, they're good stuff.
How can people reach you on social media?
Yes. So I am on Instagram at PinkHawkGames. I am on Discord as Emily Keeps Kitties, which is also where I am on Blue Sky. And you can find me on Facebook, but I think the other place to find me is on my website. So pinkhawkgames.com, where you can find out all about Pirates, which is launching soon. And obviously you can go to Kickstarter and check out Pirates of the High Teas.
And you can do that today as this episode releases.
Ooh.
So, yep, we're doing it right on release date. So go check out Pirates of the High Teas. I highly recommend it. So it's got my seal of approval. And looking forward to it. Looking forward to finally seeing it out in the wild. It feels like it's been a journey, for sure.
It has. And I'm so excited for it to get out there and to get into folks' hands. I think there's an audience for it, right? It's like any game, it's not for everyone, but I think the people that it's for, it's going to be really for them.
You can mash some crazy ingredients up and serve it to your pirate captain and just have a good time. It's so much fun, so cozy, and it definitely has whimsy.
Yes.
So, Emily, it's been fantastic talking with you, and I will be seeing you at a convention soon, I'm sure.
100%.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think that'll do it for us today. If you want to know more about Cardboard Time, you can always go to the website at cardboardtime.com. Our Instagram and Blue Sky is at Cardboard Time. The Discord is on the Tabletop Express server, which you can always email me or go to the website for an invite to that. And if you have any questions, suggestions, or ideas for discussion topics, you can email cardboardtime@gmail.com. Always happy to listen to those and then, possibly make it into the show. So as always, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you around the table next week for another episode of Cardboard Time. That's 2 weeks.